Hello. I hear you. I can't hear you.
Count yourself lucky. Is it?
Every time.
Well, I think that sometimes the meetings, like depending on which technology you use, like you can turn the volume off one by one, or you set the volume to come on automatically, or the mute. You turn on the mute.
I get everyone. And if you ever watch the videos, I make sure I put that in there because I think that's awesome. I love catching people off guard. Unmute, Adam. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am good. And we have Matt. Unmute, dear.
Hello.
How is everyone tonight?
Oh, pretty good.
Very well, thanks.
Very good.
Good. We're going to get the show started, okay?
Sounds good.
Hello, everyone. I am Opus Night, and you have entered Night Vision. And tonight, we have Matt Cox and Adam Geffen
Yep.
and Claudwig.
Claudwig, that's
Yes, I nailed it this time.
I know it works, right? No, it's Chris Lodwig, and I was like, I should have updated that. So
I'm calling you Chris. I'm just
that's actually
letting you
my
know.
work. It's my work email address. Call me Chris, please.
So how is everyone tonight?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Well,
Yeah,
Good.
doing very well, thanks.
Well, we have Chris and I joke around because he's been on the show before,
I have.
which we are so happy to have you back.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
And Adam and Matt, just to let you know, we run this like an open forum. So we want everyone to speak freely, give your honest opinion so that we can help orient other writers to certain ideas or perceptions concerning the publishing world and concerning how we reach readers. Not only reach them, but reach them. Okay? So jump in during any of the conversation. Got it?
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. So the first thing I wanted to kind of address is we have plot lines that they kind of run on a slippery slope. Where do you feel a plot line needs to begin in order to gain momentum? Do you start with the climactic kind of beginning? Because I know the first line is just considered the most important thing. But I'm one of those people that kind of like to ride into the story. So let's get your opinions and see what you master as far as your stories go. Okay, Matt, we're going to start with you.
All right. Well, when I first started writing, let me back that off a bit. When I first decided to take writing seriously, I wrote this book with the intent of actually getting it published, and I sent it to some beta readers. And initially, it started off right in the middle of the action. The character was about to go into a haunted asylum and try to recover some fellow police officers who were trapped by an angry spirit. And the beta readers were like, who is this woman? Why should I care if she survives or not? You know, I don't know who this is. Why are we, what's going on? So I pushed that down and rewrote a new first chapter that basically brings the reader into the main character's head, where her life is at the moment, what kind of person she is, not overly dumping information on everyone, just a quick little scene with her and her partner stopping at a place to get breakfast at the beginning of their shift. And the takeaway I got from that was that a reader needs, assuming this is the first book or a standalone book, a reader needs a reason to care what happens to the character. They have to see them as a person that they can empathize or sympathize with. So if you just throw somebody straight into the frying pan, they might just say, I don't know who this is confusing, I'm out, So you need to build that rapport between the reader and the character and get them invested before you start throwing chaos at them.
Okay. And Adam, what's your opinion, dear?
I tend to go for the first line. I really want the first line to grab the reader, and then I'll back off a little bit. I'm in the middle of writing a series, so the second, third, and fourth books, there isn't action to jump right into. So again, it's that first line for me that makes it that's the critical one. Grab them, at least pique their interest enough to, okay, I've read the first line. This is cool. I'll read the first paragraph now, and then get enough out there in the first paragraph to pull them a little bit. All right, I've read the first paragraph. We're doing okay. I'll read the first page. And then by the time they realize it, they're 15, 20, 30 pages into the book. And now the plot can just proceed naturally. But that first line, got to have that first line.
Okay, wonderful. Chris?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult question, and it depends where I'm at in the writing process, right? So the way I start off my plots when I'm writing, I think, is very different than how they end up when I'm finished. So in Systemic, when I was writing that story, the plot started off that I had no idea what was happening. I had an image in my mind, I had a scene. And then I followed it up with conversations and whatever. I just kind of followed my way until a story kind of coalesced. And then I went back and had to ask myself all these artistic questions that Matt and Adam were pointing out. Okay, now I've got this story. How do I construct a first line or a first paragraph that tells you enough about the story to come, that it kind of hooks people in with a promise and says, this is this kind of story, whether it's, guns blazing because it's an action story. In my case, it was someone getting a package and it meaning something. There was someone received a package, and I thought that was a good way to set up the entire rest of the story. And that was my hook. But I actually wrote that very, very late in the overall writing process. I had a whole story before I went and backfilled that first line, that first paragraph, that first page. So, but I do think it needs to tell you about the story, and it needs to obviously draw your interest. But to Matt's point, if there's just fire and things going crazy and it's chaos, you really kind of, you wind up disoriented. That's fun to do for about maybe a paragraph or a line or so, but then you've got to back up and start talking about characters and setting scenes and doing things like that. So.
Yeah, I agree. And how do you feel about where there's instances where movies I want to say adaptations of books into movies, they will start with the ending first and then actually play through and then have the ending show up the same as the beginning. So you have the ending and the beginning with the same scenes. Mm-hmm. Has anyone actually tried that when you're writing the book? Because I know I have spoken to authors as well as a couple actor friends that I have, and they said that is one of the hardest things to do, because you have to go back, and granted, they will do still shots and they'll have the same kind of background and things going on, but then it also leads into, they have different kind of makeup with women, or some different things are not right in the same scene that people tend to notice. And if you watch movies a lot, it happens that way. So do you ever feel books do that, where they kind of reiterated something that they already said from the past?
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say the closest thing I've ever done to that writing-wise is a short story I titled, conveniently enough, Ouroboros, where the opening scene and the ending scene are almost exactly the same, except for how the scene ends. There's a very noticeable difference to the ending the second time, or to that scene at the end. And it's a sort of a cyberpunk futuristic story about a hacker who's going to make a big score by ripping off his employer, and his whole day goes sideways. And then near the end of the story, he's right back in his chair at his computer before everything happened, and things have an opportunity to go a different way, or maybe he's really dead and just dreaming this part. It's really kind of a tangle, take it however you want to take it kind of story. And I got the idea after reading a similar book that not a similar book, but a book that had the similar premise where the opening chapter and the last chapter were pretty much identical. And I wanted to see if I could write a circular story like that. But I think the trick with that is to make the duplicated ending somehow surprising to the reader, or do something they're not quite expecting.
Yeah, it's got to have a reveal. Like, I think, we're talking earlier and we're saying about kind of the promise of the book. And I think if you start with the end, you need to say, this is going to be different or make more sense or something. That becomes part of the promise of what you're doing. When you bookend a story like that, you're basically saying, this thing will make sense, or in Matt's case, it will be different. When it's all done, we're going to take you through a journey from here back to here and then change it along the way. And as far as the continuity errors, when I have to do something like that, I really am a cheater. I'm a terrible cheater. I will copy the thing, I will paste it in, and then I will like maybe break it into an outline, and then I will do something like change every fifth word so it's different, and then I'll rewrite it. So that I know that it's not good. So I'll know all the details will be there, but I will rewrite them so that they're different enough that I won't sort of tax the reader's intelligence, and B, make them go, hey, he just copy pasted this. So that's my cheat on that. So.
Yeah.
So how does everyone feel as far as open ending stories? I hate open-ended stories.
I'm not a fan of those two.
With a conclusion, and there are stories that the reader needs to draw a conclusion, I feel, if it's considered a cliffhanger. But I just don't like where a story can just drop off. And then you're like, you just invested 3 hours into a movie or 2 hours into a movie, and you're like, are you serious?
Yeah, I hate that.
I feel like it kind of faded out, and they just, okay, this is it, bye-bye.
Whenever I see something like that, I think it's a huge book that just got arbitrarily chopped into smaller pieces.
It does feel like that, definitely.
Yeah, it when writing a book, I feel that there has to be a conclusion. It doesn't have to be the conclusion to the whole story, but at least there has to be some resolution to some plot thread that's been going on in that book. Even if there's a promise of more that's unresolved. Dave Weber and his Honor Harrington series is great for that. There was always this overarching thread, going on in the background, but he always resolved the issue from book to book to book. Whatever was going on in that book ended with that book.
Yeah.
Now, what do we feel as far as literary? We have literary masterpieces. They're considered throughout history and things like that. However, somewhere along the lines, the idea of what is considered a literary piece of work seems to have certain genres only, or specific genres only. And I personally, I think if something is written well and it creates the ambiance that it's supposed to, it's literary. Now, Adam, what do you think?
I personally, I think that that's a judgment that only history can make. I don't, somebody who says, oh, this is the masterpiece of 2021, it's publicity, it's hype. It's okay. I'm trying to make an impression here. If nobody is influenced by it 20 years from now, then how much of a masterpiece was it? If nobody reads it, how much of a masterpiece was it? Dickens was read by everybody in the 1800s because it was that good. He was writing good stories. Now it's a literary masterpiece because it's held up. It's endured the test of time. Ask me again in 50 years.
Right.
I think there's a test of time aspect of it too, and I think that there's a lot of mastery. One thing about Dickens is that he was masterful in his writing, and so I think in order for things to be literary, test of time, absolutely, but there's got to be some mastery. There's got to be something about it that is important, and that's a really hard thing to talk about, but it speaks to something important, often about the human condition. It says something about us as human beings, And I think it also needs to be contemporarily interesting and speak to the time in which it was written in such a way that it becomes important in that way. And so, you know, a lot of the genre fiction, I write sci-fi. Is anyone going to look back at my sci-fi novel and go, oh my God, this blew my mind away? What they'll tend to look back in 10 years is go, boy, he was wrong about all the following things. And so it's like, yeah, they might like my writing, but it'll be obsolete and silly looking in 15 years, I would assume, even though I personally find it very important and very wonderful. And it ticks all the boxes for me, but it's my book. So.
Chris, I'm going to disagree with you because look back at Foundation.
Yeah, I was going to say Asimov, and the other one is the stuff like the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is probably sci-fi. Really, yeah. There's definitely things. I'm more talking about my genre of fiction. It's like AIs and who knows. Yeah, there's definitely Dune will be history. In 30 years, people will still read Dune and consider it to be literary. I honestly believe that.
Yeah. So I think it can jump genres if it's written well enough. If it ticks the other boxes that you mentioned,
Yep.
then it can do it.
Yeah, we read iRobot in class for a reason, right? I mean,
Yep.
like I think that it's not 100%. I'm just saying that I think science fiction is maybe like science fiction and genre fiction that we all love to play around with. I think there is a distinction hard to define between that and literary fiction. And it's not that they can't overlap, they just often don't.
It's very subjective, and it depends on how, so to speak, snobby the person making the claim is.
Yeah, but there's also, it is a how many, it's a voting thing, right? It's based on how many people believe a thing, but that's the same with every other social construct, right? Why does money have value? It's how many people think money has value. That's it. Like, yeah. So
you get some hardliners that any tiny little science fiction element they automatically discount it cannot possibly be literary, you know.
Yeah, but they're assholes, right?
Agreed. Yeah, completely subjective.
Especially, are you guys so I'm going, Adam, you look like a sci-fi writer. I'm just guessing.
Hey,
Just guessing.
maybe.
He wrote romance.
So
I seen the red hair. I was like, romance, beautiful women.
I saw spaceships. So Matt, what do you write?
Well, when I first started, I was doing cyberpunk science fiction. I've got a lot of post-apocalyptic books now, but I've done just about everything. I have young adult, middle grade, superheroes, horror. I've got the series that I wrote and self-published that is doing the best is actually sort of a tongue-in-cheek vampire series. It's sort of a comedy drama. So I've got a little bit of everything, but mostly science fiction, cyberpunk, and post-apocalyptic, and a couple of fantasy books.
Yeah. So we all fall. Another thing, like Philip K. Dick, I think, by the way, a lot of his stuff will turn into literature. I think You Androids Dream of Electric Sheep will go down as literature, kind of like 1984. Like it's something like that. So
Now, how much of the authenticity do you lend to a story as far as emotions? Like when you're drawing in emotions, do you find does your life, whatever's going on in your life, kind of become emotive towards the story, and that's what you're actually looking for in the story? Do you create characters around like emotional kind of things going on in your lives? Matt?
I haven't specifically made a character based on something actively going on in my life, but I have used my life events to shape certain things in stories and have the characters react to them in ways that are more appropriate for the character compared to the way that I handled the situation. One example comes to mind is one of my young adult books, The Summer the World Ended. The main character's mother has a brain aneurysm and drops dead right in front of her. And I based that whole scene off when the same exact thing happened to my grandfather at the kitchen table. And even down to the whites of his eyes turned red. He was all disoriented. And then like a minute later, he just went straight to the floor. And I had a beta reader actually tell me, this seems kind of weird and unrealistic. Are you sure it would work like that? And I told her exactly what happened with my grandfather. And she was like, oh.
Yeah, I like that when readers read things like, that would never happen. And you're like, it absolutely happened.
Yeah. That's the amazing thing I've
Truth is
learned.
stranger than fiction.
Yeah, that exactly. I've learned that through the years, I guess the most ridiculous stories are often true.
Yeah.
You know, and time and again, it happened. It has happened to different authors that I've spoken with, and I'm like, wow, that sounds like a really interesting story. And they're like, they'll look at me, and they're like, really? I'm telling you what just happened last week, and I'm just like, I'm like, what? Who just happened to? You know,
Right.
they're like, no, seriously. I'm like, well, you really need to think of this. When the smoke clears, you need to think about this plot. And they'll like, oh, I didn't even realize that. But you know, life is a plot in itself. We're all center stage in our own lives. So when I do speak to readers directly, I try to make them realize you have to focus on your imagination. You know, how do you want your characters to evolve and to feel about different situations? And you know, that's the most important thing to me, is that element of reality, you know? Now, Chris.
It's funny. I'll keep it very short because everything you said is true. So I don't base things in my books on things that happen to me. Like, it's not like someone had a brain aneurysm or something like that. I try very hard to completely make them up, but I do very much want the emotions to feel real. And I don't know if I'm good at, well, anything or not. It's all subjective. But I will say this: there is this whole scene in Systemic where there's one of my characters, Erin, and she wants to go home. And she has this idea of home in her mind, of what it means to be home and be with her mother, and all these sort of emotional things that I set up so you would understand it. And I was doing a reading the other night, and I hadn't read this chapter in, like, I don't know, 6-7 months. And I read it and I got choked up. I'm like, oh, I guess it deeply resonates with me. And I had no idea. I was like, I just want to make it sound good. And I read it and I went, while I was in the middle of reading. And I'm like, oh, so there's that. And then later, setting her up like that with those things that are meaningful and imagery to me, later when the plot unfolds and things happen, it really adds a crushing sort of weight to the whole story because of that. And so, you know, that's my one little story. So I'm done.
Yeah, I've gotten myself like that a couple of times, thankfully not while reading in public.
Yeah, well, it was the internet. Is that public? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, have any of you actually showed emotion when you were reading in front of readers? Like, if you've done a I see the hand go up. Tell me, Chris.
No, I just did. I like literally almost cried yesterday when I was doing a reading on the internet. I didn't. I was like, I've got to turn the page here.
The eyebrows.
No,
Those eyebrows go up.
yeah, I can see my.
It's a telltale.
So, but I was surprised. It was a surprise to me. But I'm an emotional guy. I do weddings. I actually perform weddings, and I always get kind of. I'm just a mess. So.
It's why we love you.
I'm glad somebody does. It's just mostly people are embarrassed. So.
Actually, I had my editor yell at me once for a scene being too emotional.
Yeah.
Twice, actually. 2 different books got her. Bad enough to message me right as she read them and yell at me for doing that to her.
Oh, see, that's beautiful.
Did she say, so change it, or was it a fist shaking at the sky? Darn you, Matt, for.
It was a shaking fit.
Okay. She didn't tell you to not have emotional things in your book.
No, she was just playfully upset that I got her that bad. The second one, she told me she had to walk away and stop editing for 40 minutes to recover.
Whoa. What about you, Adam?
What I find, I've gotten 2 of my books in the series done as audiobooks. And so I have, obviously I've listened to them, and I go back and listen to them every now and again as well. And when my narrator is going through it and she's hitting the parts where I want, one of the characters to be, showing emotion, and she's delivering it, and I can, okay, yeah, all right, I got this one. That was a good one. I wrote those words, and yes, they're doing what I wanted them to do.
So do you guys, any of you envision the audience actually sitting there and you're like, okay, they should laugh at this, or they're going to love this? Or do you ever kind of play your characters off of those responses?
Well, my less serious books, sometimes I'll throw in lines that I hope people laugh at. I don't really have, I've never convinced myself, yes, they're going to love this, or yes, they will definitely laugh or cry at this. It's more of a hope they do kind of situation in my case.
Yeah, I put a lot of little Easter eggs and a lot of little tributes to other sci-fi authors who have influenced me into the books, and I'm hoping that the readers will also pick up on them. And so they go, oh, she said here, oh, don't forget your towel. So, a reference to Hitchhiker, or
Yeah.
Or a reference to the Princess Bride. I don't think that word means what you think it means. So
Very clever. I like that.
Yeah, I did something like that in one of my middle grade books. The main character's wearing a T-shirt with the Harry Potter thing on it that says, "I solemnly swear I'm up to no good." She runs into a centaur in another plane, and the centaur doesn't trust her because of what's written on her shirt.
It says it right on your shirt.
Yes.
Nice.
I had this thing that I think of myself kind of as my own beta reader in a way. And what I do is I love to edit. I love editing a lot. And I'll have some kernel of an idea in my mind, whether it's an emotion or a scene I want to describe or whatever it is. And then I work at it until I feel myself have a bit of a release of some sort. And I'm like, oh, I got it. I did it. And I'll probably go back and edit it again. But there's a moment when I get the word combinations just right that it really triggers the emotion or the understanding or the image that I want. And so I use myself as kind of that person, that audience of, did it affect me? And did it resonate with me in a real honest way? And then if it does, then I can move on and do the next thing. And so that's how I do it.
If you can affect yourself, you can affect any reader.
Yeah, but I'm a big old sloppy disaster of a person, so it's probably pretty easy for me. So
now, how much do you lend to imagery and ambiance within your books?
I've been told I write in a very quote unquote cinematic style. I've had multiple readers tell me reading my stuff is like watching the movie in their head. It's not really something I go out of my way thinking about doing when I'm writing, but it seems to happen that way. I try to do what I call a sensory edit pass and make sure that I'm hitting the sight, sound, smell, and taste. A lot of writers forget smell and taste if it's possible to work into a situation. Obviously, you can't taste everything, but the more of those sensory experiences that you can put in, or certain unique descriptions of a scene, it'll stick in the reader's mind, and it'll just kind of create that movie for them.
Adam?
I was just going to say, most of what I do is propelled by the dialogue. So I'm counting on the readers to pick up on what's around the characters by how they're reacting to it, and what they're saying and what they're doing. I don't have big chunks of exposition. I don't generally. Sometimes I just have to break down and explain how the warp drive works. But generally, I don't have much of that. It's all in how the characters are reacting to it, and the readers playing off of the characters and reacting to the characters, seeing this, that, or the other thing, or this, that, or the other thing happening.
I'm very big into scenery and imagery and describing the way that the grit of the sidewalk is crunching under the feet. Like I get very much into the sounds and the textures of the worlds. In Systemic in particular, the whole book actually started with an image. I was on the bus, and I just had this image in my mind of a big, broad desert valley with a river running through it and a woman hiking through it. And it was, there was a thunderstorm going on, but it was really hot. So, when the rain doesn't quite hit the ground before it evaporates up in the air. And I'm like, I had this great image. And that's actually what triggered the entire story. And somehow that became a sci-fi story, like just kind of weird. But but that image and the images of her walking through the desert and all the city scenes that I did, it's mostly in the desert and small towns, but it was very broad and cinematic, just like Matt. And so I spent a lot of time building mood and building sort of a feeling of like a temperature of the body in that it's like, because it's hot and dry the whole time, and really building that in. So I thought that was really important to the story, and it was the thing that I loved writing most about that, at least initially. And then I got into the Adam stuff with the characters and their interactions, and that actually moves the plot along, but the setting follows them along. And the same thing is true of my current book, the follow-up, where I started off with a girl sitting in a tree and watching something go on underneath her through some slushy snow. And so I very much spend a lot of time thinking about the imagery and the places where things are set and describing them so that you can feel them. That's what I want to do.
Well, I do a lot of poetry and short stories, and even in my novels, I lend a lot of time and consideration to not only where they are, but what they're thinking, how they're feeling, the smell. I try to capture all those elements, that the human elements, basically. And I do feel that the more you immerse, human traits into your characters, the more real it becomes to the reader.
Yeah.
So that's a big one that I wanted to touch on tonight, because I do know that I have had new authors who have asked me, well, how do you actually begin a story? Like, how do you build worlds, and how do you make the characters actually feel human? You're giving them thought with dialogue, and how does that work? Now, I'll run through and explain, certain dynamics that I do personally, but I know that every author, that it's rarely told, but every author writes differently. Our voices are different. So what works for me is not going to work for any of you, and vice versa. So Adam, what do you think as far as when you are creating these worlds? Where do you start or begin to tell a reader, this is what kind of elevated this thought to become a story?
I think it all kind of loops back to where we started, which was, that first scene, that first page, that first line. Right from that beginning, you're setting the tone. The first book in this series, I had essentially the first chapter. It was just this scene in my head. I wrote it down, and it's pretty much stayed the same. I mean, this is something I wrote 9 years ago, and it has pretty much stayed the same, almost untouched the entire time. It was that right, and then went from there. As I'm going through the book, I know who the characters are. I know their personalities. I know them. So I'm just writing their reactions to what's going on and how they're dealing with the situation. So their voices are genuinely theirs. If you get if you get the direction I'm going in.
Yeah, we definitely, we know, I think we've all been in that position where there's a difference between something kind of capturing your attention. Oh, that sounds like an interesting story. And that element where it's kind of elevated and you're like, wow, that would make an awesome story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as authors, you kind of have that second little feeling that comes into play, that kind of like tapping on your shoulder saying, all right, this is something. Now, Chris, where do you begin with your stories?
Well, so first, that tapping on the shoulder thing, I think is interesting, because I definitely felt that when I wrote Systemic. It was like I hadn't written in many, many, many years, and I wrote this thing, and there was just that tap came to me as, what happened next? And then what happened? and then what happened? And this is a thing, and it sounds really good. And I was like, I'm enjoying it. And so that tapping on the shoulder, which is a very accurate way of describing it, it felt like there was somebody tapping on my shoulder the whole time. I experienced as this drawing me into continuing to do it. So that's kind of how I knew, because I didn't have any idea what the story was about. It wasn't like I went, oh, that's a good idea, I will write a story about that. I just said, I'm intrigued by this vision, like, I mean, vision, not like I had a vision for the story, but the things I'm seeing and the person, and curious about why she's doing the things she's doing. And then, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And it was an asking myself questions, and it engaged my attention for 9 straight months. And suddenly I had a rough draft. And so that was how I did one. In my next book, I started, and I iterate on things a lot. I edit like crazy. I love to edit. I think of it like sculpture. I just think it's really fun. And so I don't know my characters either. So I follow them and their personalities and their interactions, and I learn who they are as they go on the rough draft. And then I'll go back and I'll tweak and say, she wouldn't do this. He wouldn't say that. He's a 65-year-old man. He's not going to know about this thing. Like, I'll go back and I'll readjust them later. So they start off as foils to have kind of conversations, and then I structure them and crystallize them into who they have to be. And then I make them consistent over time, and then sort of backfill that in and do it iteratively. But I do just follow my own interest in the story. That's how I know.
You see, psychologically, I have always referred to that tapping on the shoulder as my inner critic.
Yeah.
And it's as though he's speaking to me saying, there's more to this than meets the eye, and you need to explore this so that someone else someone else has to see the same thing or feel the same way. And, this isn't a story that can kind of be put on a shelf or eclipsed. It's something that we need to see and dive into this plot or whatnot to make it into something that is going to be a learning experience or a growing experience, or, something to that effect. Matt, how do you feel about it?
As far as that, an idea tapping me on the shoulder, it's happened twice to me so far. Once I read an article a couple years ago about environmental problems and how there were mass die-offs of insects, and nobody was really paying attention to it, and it was a sign that the environment was in trouble. Like all these insects that nobody really knows about are starting to die off in droves or whatever. And later that night, I'm just lying in bed about to go to sleep, and the first line of the book came to me. It started with the insects, and that set up this post-apocalyptic novel idea in my head, but not a nuclear pot, where the environment just went completely to hell, and there's this little isolated pocket of survivors in an underground bunker that weathered the complete destruction of the surface world, because it was allowed to the environment was allowed to deteriorate to the point where human life couldn't sustain itself on the surface anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's 400 years after this happened, and it's the story of this one woman, Raven, who's fighting to keep all the electrical engineering and the air purifier stuff going in her underground settlement thing, and starts realizing that they're about to die because all the machinery is going to fail. So she's got to come up with something to do. And the second time I had a story tap me on the shoulder, I was standing in a Barnes & Noble doing a book signing, and I just had a title come out of nowhere, 9 Candles of Deepest Black. It just hit me, and I had to write a book to go with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's what we love. Everybody's smiling like, yep.
Yeah, it's just those different entry points, like a title. It's just it's like this little thing that pops up like a little chute, and then you kind of start pulling on whatever that thing is, and it's gonna. Yeah. I'm sorry. I thought Adam was gonna say something. I thought I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say to you, Chris, since you said you perform weddings, the first scene of the first book is. It came to me. It was a wedding. Okay, so I described the wedding and all the things that went into making it perfect. At the end of the scene, the end of the chapter is, when the Reverend pulled the flechette gun out and aimed it at Cass, she grabbed her bride and groom's hands and ran like hell. And so the whole rest of the story, the whole rest of that book was finding out why this
Mhm.
just happened. So that was the tap on the shoulder moment for that one.
So when you did that, was that a moment where like, hey, I wrote this scene and it ended like that, and you're like, who the hell knows what's going to happen? Or did you make which is what I would do. I'm like, and then there was a gun. Oh, wow, why? And I would go off in this thing. Or did you build that to start you off on the rest of the story that you already knew?
Oh no, I had no idea where the rest of the
Yeah.
story was going. It was almost as much fun writing it as I hope people have reading it.
Yeah.
Because I did not know where it was going to end, or I knew where it was going to end. I just didn't know how they were going to get there.
Yeah.
So
my story there's a couple twists in my story, systemic, but the big twist, the big one, like I've had people, my editor wrote me and was like, oh dude, when she read that, but I had no idea that I'll whisper to you guys so no one knows, but there's like four characters in this story, really, but there's only 3, right? And you don't really know that. And I didn't know that. I'm like, I've got these 4 stories, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, these are the same person in a different time thing. And I'm like, and it all came together.
I love that. We got a reveal.
Yeah. Tell anybody, you will ruin the book.
Don't tell anybody, I promise.
But it is a reason that people read my book multiple times, is because they like to go back and try to catch me making mistakes. I didn't make any mistakes. I already told you how I don't make mistakes because I copy the scenes. But that was another thing. I didn't know that was going to happen. Literally, I had written 3/4 of the book before I realized that these 2 characters were the same person in a different time zone. And I all came together, and I was just Discovery wrote it. And I'm like, wow. And everyone's like, wow, that's so cool. How'd you do that? I'm like, I don't know. It just happened. And it was really cool. And I'm like, that's really fun. So
characters can really sneak up on you sometimes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I generally tend to be an outliner. Years ago, like 30 years ago, when I first tried writing, I just sat down and started writing. I got lost, never finished a book, got frustrated, walked away for a while. The next time I tried, I decided to outline everything first. But speaking of tapping on the shoulders, I once had a character tap me on the shoulder and just shakes her head like this, no, change this. And I had this book outlined, and this outline was feeding into the next 5 books in this series in a particular way. And in this one particular scene, the premise of the book is this character is a healer. She's got psionic powers and can heal other people. And it's in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. So all the raiders and the bandits and everybody else has been going to war trying to kidnap this kid because she's the healer, and And she finally finds her way into a nice village where they treat her like a human being, not a first aid kit that can talk. And the series has 2 antagonists. One is a human, one is like this demonic presence that just kind of poisons everything. And the demonic presence was going to poison the town against her and make them exile her, kick her out because it didn't want her there. And I had this whole thing outlined where they trump up some charges against her and go to exile her, and she's supposed to leave. And I was writing this scene where the character meets her adoptive older sister for the first time, and they just have this bonding moment together. And at that point, the character was just like, no, I'm staying. Screw you, screw your outline, change it.
Yeah. I say I'm outlining my current book, but I say my characters always have veto power.
Yeah.
Like I'm outlining to make sure I get my plots and my points, and I touch off everything and close off loose ends and do all that. But I've had many times that my characters are like, nope, that's not what's going to happen. And so I know exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah. I know the feeling too. This particular one over here, she's got her own Instagram account. She has her own Facebook account. She writes on my website, telling the stories that I don't put in the books, because she's like, no, these things also happened. I don't care if you don't think they're going to sell. I'm going to write them.
Yeah.
Oh.
This is Orpheus. And as Chris will tell you, he is my muse. When a lot of my short stories come into play, he's the one. Literally, a lot of the characterization is built around how he evolves. And there's instances, I've been in a park or in the woods, and we've been doing a scene because I love cinematics. And even with the channel, I have cinematics that I will do, whether it's with the poetry, the short stories, or both. And throughout so many times, I have had people that literally will walk past, glance at him, and I mean, he's a skeleton, he's laying on the ground, and, we're playing out a scene, and they're just standing there, and they're watching the entire scene. And then, as soon as the scene's over, and I'm like, okay, guys, let's, move him on over here. And I'm like, come on, Orpheus. And they will follow me through the park. I've had it happen so many times. And I'm like, and it's so funny because when we're done and we're ready to kind of clean up and whatnot, we'll get people clapping. We'll have people going like, well, where's this going to be? And where can I see this? And, you should think about putting an audience in it as it's going on as well. And I had thought about it, and I'm thinking, where am I going to get random people from? And my daughter laughed and she goes, Mom, they follow us.
Well, the internet is also.
I was dying. I thought that was awesome. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
Now, with dialogue, how many of you actually put dialogue in your outlining? Or is that something that you will kind of let it flow organically? Matt?
If it's a critical plot point being discussed, I will sometimes put the actual dialogue in the outline, or a line like they discuss X here. Or sometimes I'll put actual dialogue back and forth, but only if it's really important or vital to the scene or the chapter.
Anna?
What is this outlining of which you speak?
Exactly. It was foreign to me too. I gotta admit, I am not an outliner. Every
No,
show, that's something that someone will kind of throw back at me, and I'm like, outline? I've tried. It. No, it will never happen. Sorry, guys.
A lot of times things come to me in little snitches and snatches. And so if it's a scene, I'll write, oh, I have this cool way a water glass should look or something. I don't know. I'll describe it. And the same thing is true with dialogue. And I'll like, this person's going to have this conversation. It might be like 4 or 5 lines, and I'll stuff it way up. It's going to have to fit somewhere right here in this outline, and I'll put it there just kind of for safekeeping. So I do, if as anything comes to me, dialogue or anything else, I'll stick it in the outline to put it in the right spot. And then I'll throw it all away and I'll redo it anyway. But it's a good place. It's a little piggy bank. I stick in a little piggy bank there. Yeah,
you pull it when you know you need it.
Yeah, I'll need it. But I'll also, it's kind of like, you kind of feather the sides of it like you do, like, drywalling spackle. It's going to be there, and you kind of feather it out, and you're like, cut it off later, and it gets all the right shape and the right texture. Yeah. I do put it there as something to inspire me later, and then I'll, like I said, things get worked out. But.
Yeah. 98% of my dialogue I write on the fly while writing. It's just the important lines or the zingers that if they hit me when I'm outlining, I'll put them in.
Yeah.
Now, I had been asked a question by one of the viewers a couple weeks ago. If a plot twist is congruent to the story, do I put it in or do I take it out? Now, with this word, I'm going to answer first this time. I'm usually last, but this one, I got something to say. This one is, I think a story has to have multiple plot twists. I know they kind of speak of one, but throughout there's got to be these many little twisting, turning kind of, you know what I mean? Plot twist. So when someone is speaking of a plot twist, my first question is, are you going for some climactic kind of plot twist, or are you, where there's going to be a finality to the story, or are you going for the twist and turns within the story?
Well,
I kind of think when I said that. So yeah. I'm going to get your opinion. How would you have answered that or approached that?
It depends on if the purpose of the twist is to blow the reader's mind or make them just look at everything they just read in a different light. I mean, there's several different things that a twist can accomplish. Like, you get to the twist point and paints the rest of the whole other book is not what you thought it was. So you got to reread it to see what was really going on, kind of like a sixth sense sort of thing. Or then you get a plot twist that just completely blows your mind. I'm struggling to think of what an incongruent plot twist would be. Is it like a fantasy movie where the walls fall down and they're on an alien mothership?
Well, I think they were kind of going for the fact of having two characters that were together. And I guess that somehow it revolved around a relationship. So that's where they kind of lost me on it. Because that's where I was saying there's mini twists, and then there's, considering plot twists, they're mini twists. They're kind of little mini eureka moments when you're reading.
Mm-hmm.
My interpretation of the question. Oh, Adam, were you talking? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, life is always unexpected. So if your books are reflecting life at all, then there are always going to be things happening which hopefully the reader doesn't see coming. There's always going to be this little plot twist, just like Opus was saying. There's always going to be these little, oh, I expect you to go left and you went right.
Mm-hmm.
But
the up and downs of the story.
Yeah. So I think that the way I look at this, and I hope I'm not a coward for saying this, I think that your plot twist needs to work within the universe of possibilities that are available to you. They should be outlandish, maybe, but if you're going to turn left or right, and a dragon shows up and eats you, like what? Like I don't know where that came from. Like, unless you're in a universe where there's dragons that could show up and eat you, like if you throw it. So it depends on the congruity, that word, and how it's going to play. I think that the way I look at those things is a lot of times you suddenly want a dragon to show up and eat somebody, and you need to be disciplined and say, I'm going to put that aside and not put that in my book. But I think you also need to be open to surprises. I think that twists in books are really about discovery of meaning. They're about discovery of purpose or character, whatever it is. You're like, it's a massive amount of sudden information is a dawning upon you of something that you're like, oh, it reframes everything. Or it could also be a small one, to your point, where it's like, oh, that's how the monetary system works. Oh, okay, that's neat, but if it's just something shows up out of left field, or you're doing a Deus Ex Machina kind of thing, like, you need to be disciplined as a writer. My editor taught me something. My editor taught me more than anything ever about writing, about this idea of a promise, and the promise and the contract you have with your reader, which is, I'm going to tell you a story and you're going to enjoy it within the context of the thing you're talking about. And if suddenly some weird thing happens, my friend told me she was reading this great story a while ago, and she's like, and it was like, what's going on? What's going on? And like out of the middle of nowhere, it was like vampire aliens showed up, and that was the end. And she was like, what the hell? And I have no problem with vampire aliens. Like, that's great. Like, okay, write a book that has vampire aliens. That's great. But if this book isn't anything like that at all, and there's no mention of vampires or aliens for the first 300 pages, and then they show up at the end, you're like, what? Why? Yeah. That wasn't the book I signed up to read. And so you got to be careful with it, I guess, is my opinion.
And that's actually what we discussed last week, as far as books tend to do that at times. They'll take on a whole different story, like somewhere they get detoured at times, and it's like you'll literally put the book down and be like, where the hell were they going with this? Like putting a dinosaur in, or a vampire just to make it a vampire, book, and things like that. And
have you ever read the book If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Umberto Eco?
I've heard of it.
So that book, the whole book, and I mean, that's the point of the book, is that he does that. He's like, he reads the book, and I'm reading a book, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, there's no more pages in here. And someone's like, oh, you wanted this book. And he goes, he's like, and it's a totally different story, but then you get all into it, and then it's like, oh, there's pages missing. And they go, oh, you meant this book. And he keeps switching the book up for the entire book. And it's like, but that's a joke.
Turns into a little conundrum.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I have had a great time. And we're going to go through, and how can we reach every one of you? Matt, we're going to start with you.
My website is www.matthewcoxbooks.com/WordPress. I have a links page there rather than just waste time battling all my links. You can find it on the website there. You can also search for me on Facebook and Amazon.
Okay. Adam?
My website is CassidyChronicles.com. That's the name of the series. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, just under my name, Adam Gaffin. I don't hide from my fans.
Chris?
You can find me at chrislodwigauthor.com is my webpage. You can find me at I'm on Facebook. There's not a lot of Chris Lodwigs in the world. I think there's 2 of us, and only one of us is a sci-fi author. So I'm pretty easy to find. You can get me on Amazon and anywhere books are sold online. You can get Systemic and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm always Chris Lodwig. LinkedIn, Chris Lodwig. It's me every time. So
Now, gentlemen, I don't know how you are allotted for time, but if you have your books available next to you, would you care to read your blurb? So we can I love giving my readers and everyone's readers, period, the opportunity to also not only visually meet you, but to hear.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So,
you want to start us?
absolutely. This is the book that is actually coming out April 16th. So
Okay.
it hasn't been released yet. It's called A Quiet Revolution. It's the 4th volume of the Cassidy Chronicles. And the blurb is, how do you end a war you want no part of? Cass and Ken just want to get back to their plans for exploration. That doesn't seem to be in the cards, though. So now it's time to think outside the box. If the leaders of Artemis won't listen, maybe it's time for new leaders. New tools, new crews, new challenges, but the same Cass and Ken. They're not going to let anything stop them.
Beautiful. Matt?
Which one to choose? I have like 100. I'll go with Division Zero. It was the first book that I actually had published. Division Zero is the title of the book and the series. Most cops get to deal with living criminals, but Agent Kirsten Wren isn't most cops. A gifted psionic with a troubled past, she possesses a rare combination of abilities that makes her a powerful weapon against paranormal threats. Adrift in a society that fears people like her, she feels alone in a city of millions. In the year 2418, rampant violence and corporate warfare have left no shortage of angry wraiths. Most are little more than fleeting shadows or eerie whispers in the darkness, but every so often one gathers enough strength to threaten the living. A series of attacks by androids known as dolls leave the normal police baffled. Unable to explain what made the machines malfunction, they punt the case to Division Zero. Kirsten's investigation into who, or what, is behind the random murders soon makes her a target for corporate assassins. Despite her past, and the cynical city around her, she clings to the belief that no one is beyond redemption. Alas, the killer is desperate to claim as many innocent souls as possible, and one just might be hers.
Awesome. Chris, you ready?
I had to run all the way upstairs to get my books.
We kind of figured.
There you go. It's got this from my reading last night. So the blurb for it is, for generations, a sentient AI has watched over the world and solved humanity's problems. It was an age of objectivity, social equality, and ecological recovery. It should have been a golden age. Now, 3 strangers are on a pilgrimage to the arid sagelands to and underpopulated cities of the systemic era on their way to the seemingly innocuous town of Prower. There they will uncover the secrets that lay buried beneath the town and learn the truth about their remembered pasts. In the end, they must choose between their sanity or solving humanity's final and most intractable problem.
Beautiful. Gentlemen, I've had a great time.
Same.
Yep. Thank you very much,
For
Opus.
being here.
And for our readers and our viewers, if anyone would like to get in touch with any one of them, or they have any difficulty getting in touch with anyone, opusnight.com. We will see you next week again on Night Vision. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful night.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.